So we are here with Mr. Al McFarlane, publisher of the Minneapolis Insight News. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's just get to it. You know, we've all know the name George Floyd now and the 9 minutes that tragically he was killed. And then Minneapolis showed out. We saw the protest and we saw what happened in after that. So could you give us a little more context of what's going on within the community in Minneapolis for the Black community, and then more generally, the Minnesota community about what's happening now? Because this is obviously not too far off the heels of Philando Castile and other instances. So can you just give us a little insight?
Well, thank you for connecting with us. It's a big issue, and what has happened here has turned the community inside out, upside down. 9 minutes, 9 fateful minutes that are tragic in and of themselves and for their own reasons, but amplified and compounded by what they represent in terms of the expanse of anguish they've unleashed around the country, and also because of the depth of the experience of Black and brown men losing life, Black and brown people, not just men, losing life at the hands of those who are sworn to protect us and serve us. So this is a tipping point, a boiling point, and I think that everybody in this community is looking at this in a multi-leveled way. At the essential core, there is the simple anguish, simple and complex anguish that comes from watching a human being lose his life, a man kill a man, not just a man, a team of men, the policemen kill a man. We watched it, and it's horrific. So we're all suffering the trauma of that. And the good thing, if there's such, you can say that, is that the city responded quickly by firing the 4 officers that were involved directly in the arrest and detention of George Floyd. And any minute now, in the next half an hour or so, we're expecting that State Attorney General Keith Ellison will announce that the 3 other officers will be charged as well. We're also expecting that he'll announce the upgrade of the charge from 3rd-degree murder and manslaughter and other charges to 2nd-degree murder. And that 2nd-degree murder charge will go to the officer whose knee was in the neck of George Floyd. And that charge will also be placed on the 3 other officers who were involved in the arrest and detainment. So, you know what happened? This thing so shocked people, so scarred people, that people took to the street immediately, just in shock, and demanding justice and justice now. And got kind of what we expected from the Hennepin County Attorney, Mike Freeman, which was an attitude, well, we got to go slow. This is going to take a long time. We don't know if there's other extenuating circumstances that mean, you know, it would be unfair to the officer if we rushed to judgment on him. But that was typical and classic treatment of Black people and the Black community by this county attorney. And so I think people were just very upset and protested. And in the middle of the protest, you also had people that were kind of anti-government and just history of being mad, who both erupted. And you saw the damage that took place on Lake Street, which is near where the incident took place, and then in other parts of the city as well. The city is calm now. I interviewed the Minnesota commissioner of the Department of Public Safety, John Harrington, a couple of hours ago. And what he said in describing the chronology was that they weren't prepared for what happened. They supported and understood and felt for all of those citizens of Minnesota that were properly and appropriately angry and disappointed, and felt the need to protest and to raise their voices. And they supported that, they expected that, and they wanted to facilitate that, but they were not prepared for the thing to turn south, as they say, and erupt in the burning and looting and other damage. And that after a minute or two, they discovered that a lot of that burning was actually perpetrated by people in this community and other communities that have a specific intention of challenging authority of all kinds and creating havoc, and doing it at the expense of ordinary residents of the community, ordinary people that express their dissatisfaction with the wheels of justice and with the horror of the killing of George Floyd. So a lot of stuff to unpack, and you know, everybody is in shock still.
Has any state or local officials mentioned anything about addressing the history of Minnesota law enforcement and Black communities?
Yes, yes. Today or yesterday, maybe yesterday, the governor introduced and announced that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights would do a 10-year look at the history of law enforcement and Black people and brown people, and examine all of the killings, all of the patterns of arrest, the patterns of enforcement, the patterns of sentencing, and everything associated with law enforcement for the past 10 years will be thoroughly examined and conclusions drawn to demonstrate or reflect what patterns exist. Of course, we in the Black community know what the pattern is. We know the story because we've watched it, and it's been us at the center of it. But it's been white people that have denied that there is a problem in the Black community and been sold this bill of goods that when things happen to us, it's just a one-of, it's an isolated incident, when we know there's a pattern to the practice that at the end of the day disadvantages our people and fails to recognize our humanity and our dignity.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to get your comments about what the president's administration have just declared yesterday with the basically threatening of cities and states to punish protesters. We saw a little bit of that yesterday here in Dallas, and we were seeing that nationally. Can you give a little commentary on what you think those kind of comments mean, and what they do in effect of places like Minneapolis, which are the epicenter of things like this?
Well, I think it's dangerous, and I think he's baiting and enabling rogue actors. You know, what we've noticed since the election of Donald Trump is an emboldened white right wing. The dog whistle about making America great again hearkens them to feel like they have a privilege that is under assault, and that unless they do things, they will be displaced or removed, or their privilege will be diminished. Well, the point is that is true. Their privilege is being challenged, and it will be displaced, and things will change. But that's what he is also sounding the alarm on. And what white people are doing is responding by becoming increasingly violent and virulent in their approach and response and their treatment of Black people, not only in law enforcement, but even in retail, even on the street, in common courtesy. The spirit of the interaction between whites and Blacks is different now, different from when it was in the hopeful era of Obama's presidency. And so there's been a resurgence of people that present anger, angst, spite, contempt, and do it publicly and feel like they have a right to do it and feel like they're obligated to do it. So their sense of obligation to defend the castle against us is becoming kind of more and more clear. And in fact, that's what this murder, I believe, symbolizes and reflects. It's a raw look at the relationship that they feel is appropriate, and that is a knee on the neck of a Black man and the death of a Black man. And it's both a reality specific, but it's also a metaphor for the relationship between us and white supremacist society over the duration of our experience here in North America.
Mm-hmm. And finally, I know you've got a lot to do, but as this all happens, we are still under the umbrella of COVID-19. Has any of that quarantine or self-isolating, all those in the general information around stay home, be safe kind of thing, has that had any effect on the response of the people in charge, law enforcement? Because what I'm hearing is there's a lot of talk about, well, we got to do things slow because of this, but then we see people in the streets, thousands of people, cops as just as packed as the protesters. And it seems as though that is lip service to something else. And from your perspective, being in the epicenter, as I said, have you seen anything that might allude to something else going on in that situation?
Well, it's epicenter, epicenter on top of epicenter. In Minnesota, Hennepin County has the largest number of COVID-19 cases and deaths of the state. The two top impact areas, obviously, are the two largest cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. And Minneapolis is the center of Hennepin County. Hennepin County has the largest reporting of deaths and cases of COVID-19. The second largest, about half of Hennepin County, is Ramsey County, next door in St. Paul. In Hennepin County, Black people make up about 19% of the population, but probably close to 60% of the infections. So that story is playing itself out in our town like it is everywhere else. And our people are at greater risk of exposure because of a variety of things, including the comorbidities of obesity, diabetes, heart conditions, et cetera. And so the locations where we are and our historic experiences due to disparate healthcare, health disparities in Minnesota, phenomenal, put us at greater risk. That is the setting out of which this horror, this atrocity arises, complicating life even further. So two ways you look at it. One is, what does it mean for people that are gathering in protest? Is that going to be one of the things that might create a spike in the Black community or in the urban community in particular? And then how is it that people can express their anger, their right to protest, but at the same time be mindful and do distancing as much as possible as they protest? It makes it difficult.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. I know you got a lot to do. We didn't want to take too much of your time. We do appreciate all the work you are doing out there in Minneapolis. And once again, just thank you.
Thank you. We're going live on radio every day with a report on one of the local radio stations, inviting all the leaders of our community to weigh in on elements around the issue of the George Floyd murder and charges, et cetera, but also tying that to COVID-19 and tying that to the storied disparities in health, wealth, education that our community has traditionally been facing. So it's a lot to do, but that's what we're doing.
Thank you so much. And you can find these and more stories and more interviews on dallasweekly.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And of course, as always, if you can, please stay safe, stay home, and we will see you tomorrow.